Normandy, France, June 26, 1944. The night pressed down heavy over the hedgerows. Rain fell slow, soft, patient, the kind that seeps into uniforms and minds. Inside a small dugout near Saint-Lô, 5 German soldiers sat around a field radio. The machine hissed and crackled, the needle twitching through static like a restless heartbeat. Funkstille, their Feldwebel barked earlier, radio silence. But after midnight, when the front quieted and even the mortars stopped coughing, the radio operator twisted the dial again, just to check the frequencies, just to feel less alone. At first, it was the usual mess, static, far-off voices, a British broadcast breaking through the fog. Then, something different. A rhythm, a pulse, a drum brushed lightly, a bass walking steady like footsteps down a city street. Then a trumpet, bright, golden, alive. A voice followed, smooth and careless, like someone smiling while the world burned. It was In the Mood by Glenn Miller and his orchestra, coming straight from the Allied network. The men froze. One of them frowned. Was it das? The operator grinned without realizing it. It's music. The sergeant scowled. Amerikanische Propaganda. Degenerate noise. But no one moved to turn it off. The melody slipped through the bunker, bouncing off metal helmets and damp walls. For a moment, the war felt far away, like it belonged to another planet. The trumpet solo soared, playful and free. It was everything their world wasn't. The operator adjusted the antenna, catching the signal clean. Behind the jazz, a cheerful voice spoke in English. This is the American Forces Network, bringing you the sounds of home to our boys in Europe. Then the next track began, Count Basie's 1 o'clock jump. The youngest soldier, barely 19, whispered that his father used to play the piano before the war. Another one laughed, nervous, embarrassed. The sergeant spat on the ground. Turn that off. But his voice lacked conviction, because even he felt it. That strange warmth that rose inside, a rhythm that disobeyed the rules. Their music marched in straight lines. This one danced in circles. They had been trained to fear American tanks, American planes, American soldiers. But nobody warned them about American music. Outside, artillery echoed faintly in the distance, deep, slow, like thunder behind mountains. Inside, the radio kept swinging. Trumpets, saxophones, laughter. The sound of something impossible. Joy, in a place where joy wasn't allowed. The sergeant finally stood up and yanked the power cord. Silence returned, thick and guilty. For a few seconds, none of them spoke. Then the operator said quietly, "You can destroy a bridge or a tank, but how do you destroy a song?" No one had an answer. They had no idea that same melody, born in smoky clubs across the Atlantic, would echo through their war again. It would slip past orders, past walls, and into places the Reich couldn't reach. And for some, it would be the first thing that made them question everything they'd been told. If you've ever wondered whether music can cross a trench, keep listening. Because what came next made even the most loyal soldiers stop and think. Berlin, 1938, 1941. Long before Normandy, long before the smell of wet earth and cordite, the rhythm had already been declared an enemy. In Berlin, posters warned of Neger music, music of chaos and decay. Joseph Goebbels' Ministry of Propaganda called it a virus that dissolves discipline. Jazz was banned from official broadcasts, the saxophone labeled a weapon of moral collapse. Still, it leaked through the cracks. On summer nights in smoky basements near the Tiergarten, German teenagers calling themselves Swing-Jugend danced anyway. Boys slicked their hair like British crooners. Girls wore skirts too short for the Reich's taste. They whispered English lyrics learned phonetically, spun stolen 78 RPM records of Duke Ellington, Benny Goodman, Count Basie. When police raided, They hid the discs behind false walls, the way others hid forbidden books. A 16-year-old named Helmuth had once played clarinet in those rooms. Before the war, before the uniform, he remembered the smell of cigarette smoke and the clack of shoes on the floorboards. It was sloppy, loud, alive. Freiheit im Takt, freedom in rhythm. Then came the arrests. His bandmates disappeared into re-education camps. His clarinet was confiscated. A month later, he joined the army. The propaganda machine was efficient. At training grounds, instructors barked that jazz was racial poison. Radio operators were taught to jam foreign signals carrying such infection. And yet, a secret irony pulsed through the Reich itself. A state-sponsored band called Charlie and His Orchestra recorded swing arrangements of Allied songs, rewritten with Nazi lyrics, to beam back across the channel. Goebbels had learned that rhythm could travel where speeches could not. He tried to weaponize the very thing he feared. By 1941, Berlin clubs that once echoed with trumpets were silent. The gramophones collected dust. The official sound of Germany became the march, precise, mechanical, obedient. No improvisation, no blue notes, every measure in order. And yet, somewhere deep inside men like Helmuth, the forbidden rhythm still tapped quietly against the ribs, waiting for a chance to breathe again. When the war carried them to Normandy, they brought that silence with them. They thought they had buried the old songs for good. They didn't know that across the sea, a band led by Glenn Miller was tuning up, ready to send those same rhythms back across Europe, one broadcast at a time. If you think ideology can silence art forever, wait until you hear what happened when the Reich's perfect order met the swing of freedom. Normandy, France, July 1944. Rain had turned the road to Saint-Lô into grey soup. The Tiger crews were gone ahead, and the infantry held the hedgerows in silence. Helmuth lay beside the field radio, trying to warm his hands over a candle stub that refused to stay lit. Static whispered, then cracked. A few English words bled through, coordinates, laughter, a woman's voice reading weather reports. And then, as if the air itself took a breath, a trumpet slid out of the noise, a slow 4-count on the hi-hat, piano walking up the scale, brass answering with a grin. This is the American Forces Network, bringing you the sounds of home to our boys in Europe. The melody was, "Take the A train." Helmuth froze. Every rule he'd ever learned said to kill the signal, but the notes curved like smoke, impossible to catch. Behind him, Rudy chuckled. "Das ist verboten," he said, half teasing, half afraid. No one moved. The music filled the dugout. Trumpets traded lines with the piano, drums brushing like footsteps on wet cobblestones. It sounded like movement, like cities that never slept, women in red dresses, neon, laughter. It sounded alive. The sergeant muttered, "Amerikanische Propaganda," but even he leaned closer. Helmuth felt the beat in his fingertips, the ghost of his lost clarinet pressing invisible keys. For a heartbeat, he wasn't a soldier. He was 16 again, hiding in a Berlin basement, the clarinet squealing a half-bar late while his friends cheered. Outside, artillery rumbled far away, a counter-rhythm in the dark. Inside, the swing held steady, improvised, reckless, free. Our music marches, Helmuth thought, theirs dances. When the record ended, an American DJ's voice cut in, cheerful, confident. "Keep your chin up, boys, wherever you are tonight." The words weren't meant for them, but somehow they landed. The sergeant snapped the dial to static, muttering "Genug." Enough. The sound vanished, leaving a hollow quiet that seemed louder than the guns. Rudy whispered, "They play like they don't fear mistakes." Helmuth nodded. Maybe that's why they win. No one answered. The candle guttered out. Somewhere beyond the hedgerow, a single trumpet phrase still echoed in his head, bright, uncommanded, alive. If you think a melody can't shake an army's certainty, stay with this story. Their next night by the radio would test loyalty against rhythm itself. Normandy, France, July 1944. Rain again. Always rain. The hedgerows steamed in the dawn light, while a fine drizzle whispered on helmets and mess tins. Helmuth had barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, the trumpet line from the night before came back, looping, laughing, refusing to fade. That evening, when the sergeant went to check the perimeter, he switched the radio on again. Static, heartbeat, then the warm hum of the American Forces Network. The announcer was back. "G.I. Jive with your pal G.I. Jill, keeping you company out there." And then another brass explosion. "Don't sit under the apple tree." He listened, grinning despite himself. Each note bent the rules. The bass slid where it shouldn't. The horns answered late, perfectly wrong. It was chaos made beautiful. His fingers tapped the rhythm on the table. He didn't notice Rudy watching. Rudy leaned in close. "Mach leiser, turn it down." "Why?" Helmuth whispered. "Because if the Feldwebel hears it again, he'll have your hide." But Rudy didn't leave. He sat beside him, listening too. When the door flap lifted, both froze. The sergeant's shadow filled the doorway. He didn't shout, just stared at the radio. The DJ's voice floated through. "Here's one for the boys who can't be home tonight." The sergeant said, "Turn it off." Helmuth's hand hovered over the dial. Then the trumpet hit a perfect blue note, the kind that hung in the air like a dare. He hesitated. The sergeant's jaw tightened. "Schnell!" Helmuth switched it off. Silence collapsed around them. He expected punishment, but the sergeant just stared at the blank radio. After a moment, he said quietly, "It's strange. They sound happy." Then he left. Later, as they cleaned their rifles, Rudy whispered, "How can they be happy? They're fighting the same war we are." Helmuth said, "Maybe that's the point. Maybe they play so they remember who they are." That night, he wrote a line in his pocket diary, "Their music walks in curves, ours stands at attention." The next day, rumors spread that the Americans were advancing again. Orders came down, "Pack, move, hold the line." Helmuth obeyed like everyone else. But inside his head, the drums kept swinging, offbeat, impossible to march to. If this contrast hits you, the discipline of one world against the freedom of another, tap that like so more people hear it too. Because what happens next is when belief itself starts to bend. Part 5. Collapse and Captivity, Western Germany. April 1945. The retreat never really ended. It just slowed. Roads filled with mud and refugees, engines gasped for fuel, and the night sky burned red in every direction. Helmuth's unit was down to half strength when the order finally came to surrender. He remembered almost nothing of that morning, only the silence after the gunfire stopped. No drums, no trumpets, just wind moving through the empty fields. The Americans were already there, young men in dusty uniforms, helmets painted dull green, talking with a drawl that sounded like a song by itself. They weren't monsters. They were tired, smiling, handing out cigarettes. Inside the prisoner camp, rows of tents flapped in spring wind. At first, Helmuth felt only shame, the kind drilled into him for years. But at night, when the generators quieted, another sound rose over the fences, a radio again, laughter, then a familiar swing. "This is the American Forces Network, and here's Glenn Miller's Army Air Force Band with A String of Pearls." He froze, so did Rudy. A few guards were dancing in the mud, offbeat, clumsy, unbothered by rank. Someone clapped on 2 and 4 instead of 1 and 3. The rhythm wrong by military standards, right by something deeper. Helmuth sat against the tent pole, eyes closed. Each horn line uncoiled another memory. The Berlin basement, the candle in Normandy, the blue note that dared him to breathe. Across the camp, a German voice murmured, "Das ist Freiheit," freedom. The next morning, a guard named Sam offered him coffee from a tin mug. The liquid was bitter, the smell wonderful. From a small speaker nearby, Louis Armstrong sang, "I'll be seeing you." Helmuth didn't understand every word, but he caught the tone. Longing, humor, hope. Sam said, "You like jazz?" Helmuth answered carefully, "I didn't. Now I think, maybe yes. He wanted to ask how someone could make music like that in the middle of a war, how anyone could still find swing after years of marching. But he didn't have the language, so he just listened. Later, in the camp journal, he wrote, "They called us invincible, but the sound that won was not the march. It was the pause before the next note, the courage to play it anyway." By the time the war ended, Glenn Miller was already gone, his plane lost over the channel months earlier, yet his music kept circling the airwaves, louder than any victory speech. The rhythm outlived the empire that tried to silence it. If you've followed this far, remember, the rhythm you can't control is the one that changes you. Stay till the end. The final part shows how a single song followed a man all the way into peace. Berlin, 1952. The city breathed differently now. Half rebuilt, half haunted, its streets hummed with trams, conversation, and the clink of coffee cups against glass. Where bomb craters once smoked, neon signs flickered above doorways announcing Jazz Abende, jazz nights. Helmuth stood outside one of them, coat collar turned up, listening before he entered. The club was small, tucked beneath the ruins of what had been a cinema. A trumpet echoed faintly down the stairwell, warm, human, impossibly alive. He hesitated, then descended. Inside, smoke curled through the low light. The band was American, stationed with the occupation forces. The drummer counted softly, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, and the room lifted into Take the A Train, the same song. He sat at the back, hands folded, the same hands that once tuned field radios and loaded rifles. The horns shimmered, the bass walked lazy lines, and the pianist smiled as if every note were a secret joke. People laughed, clapped, moved their shoulders in time. No one cared about rules or ranks, they just listened. Helmuth closed his eyes. He saw the candle in Normandy, the sergeant's tight jaw, Rudy whispering that they played without fear. He saw the prisoners tapping their feet behind barbed wire, the guard named Sam pouring coffee, and he realized something simple. The music hadn't changed, only he had. When the song ended, applause filled the room. The trumpeter leaned into the microphone and said, "Next one's for anyone who ever survived a bad time." The drummer laughed. They launched into a slow blues, half sad, half joyful. Helmuth smiled for the first time in years. Outside, night settled over Berlin, but the music spilled into the street anyway. A young couple danced on the sidewalk. The rhythm bent around corners, over stones still scarred by shrapnel, into a city learning to breathe again. Helmuth whispered to himself, half prayer, half confession, "We conquered with discipline. They conquered with rhythm." He understood now what his father meant when he called jazz Freiheit im Takt, freedom in rhythm. The notes didn't need permission. They just found their way through the noise. He stood to leave, but the band struck the final chord, a blue note that refused to resolve, hanging in the air like a question. Maybe that's what freedom really was, a note that didn't march, but still moved forward. If you made it here, thank you for listening. Remember, strength can build walls, but only freedom makes music. What do you think truly wins in the end? Obedience or improvisation? Leave your thoughts below.